To start, I would like to introduce Councillor Joan Atkinson, Deputy Leader and Portfolio Holder for Culture, Leisure and the Visitor Economy, South Tyneside, to welcome us all to the Customs House.
Thank you, Lisa. Indeed, welcome to the Customs House and South Shields in South Tyneside. So, as Lisa said, I'm the Deputy Leader of South Tyneside Council until next Thursday when I retire. So this is one of my last engagements, but I'm delighted to be here and only sorry that I can't be here all afternoon. Unfortunately, I can't. A little bit about South Tyneside. We've made huge strides, I think, on the improvements we've made with regards to liaison with creatives, and we've co-produced a cultural strategy in South Tyneside last year. It's called Making Waves, if anybody wants to check that out online. And the aim being that as a council, we can't do it all, but actually together working with organisations, individuals, we can. And making resources such as this available to people, whether it be for displays or creatives to dance, sing, whatever, we can make things happen. We are an Arts Council England priority place. I'd like to think that a lot of that is because of the huge efforts we've made over the most recent years in terms of engaging with our residents, engaging with creatives and organisations to do more of that with communities and involve them more. We have now 3 NPO status. We have status for 3 NPOs, sorry, and we're hugely proud of that. I think going forward, I am a member until next Thursday of the North East Cultural Partnership. Someone else will be no doubt taking my place. I think the footprint which it serves is, coterminous with the devolution footprint, and I can see that being hugely beneficial. We do have close relationships now with the local authorities, and going forward, I think that's something that we will all be able to benefit from. So I'm really looking forward to watching that with interest about how we can, make that mutually beneficial in this wonderful region that we have. Other than that, I'd just like to say thank you ever so much for coming. Please, visit us again in South Tyneside. We have our Bear Fort, which is a, World Heritage Site just further down, about, a mile or so from here. Please come another time if you haven't already been. We've got the wonderful Tyne Archives and Museums looking after that for us, as well as our lovely, very cosy museum, but it's wonderful, packed full of local things and things from much further afield. So please come again, and I hope you have a lovely afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we're going to hear from Martin Wills, who is the Partnerships Team Leader for Historic England in the North East and Yorkshire. I should also add that Historic England has sponsored this event today as well.
Hello, everyone. How is everyone? I've got a loud voice. Man. Hi, I'm Martin Wills, and I'm the Partnership Team Leader for the North East for Historic England. And we've partnered with the North East Cultural Partnership today for this event. So it's an absolute honour to welcome you all to the North East Heritage Forum. And what better venue to hold it in than the Customs House's historic Grade 2 building. Our region is steeped in heritage that plays an important part for the life of the region. South Tyneside is no exception, with heritage from the Roman Empire, Bede's Monastery at Jarrow, and more recent listing buildings like Customs House that we're in today. These all speak to the sense of pride of place for South Tyneside and can do so much for the people who live here, and also the people who visit, and also the people who care about this special place. Historic England believe that heritage has the power to improve people's lives through building thriving places, connecting communities with their history, and building networks of active participation through volunteering and community involvement, getting people involved and giving a sense of ownership of their heritage. We have an incredible agenda today with a lineup of incredible speakers that I hope will inspire us in our work and spark discussion throughout the day. It's great to see so many of us here. I think we're over 100 or something, which is absolutely fantastic. And it's great that we all share the belief that culture has the power to improve people's lives. I hope you have an enjoyable day, and I'm looking forward to join the various discussions throughout. Thanks very much. Enjoy.
Amazing. Everyone's sticking to time without even having to threaten them. Super. So now down to the nitty-gritty in our first session, which is called Where Are We Now? We're going to take a look at some of the current challenges facing the sector, but what's brilliant is we also have Matthew Rooke here, who led on the recent refresh for the Northeast Culture Case for Culture. And so following him, we'll have Jodi Larder from the National Lottery Heritage Fund, who among her many regional responsibilities also was a part of the recent Innovation Fund initiative by the National Lottery Heritage Fund, which is a really interesting example of how they're trying to push into places where they're responding to what we're all saying is missing from our practice in the sector, delivering heritage projects. And I'm very interested to hear actually about the kinds of innovation that is going to be stimulated in our practice. And the really great news is what Matthew is going to feed back about what all of you in the region have said we need is exactly where both Historic England and National Lottery Heritage Fund are aiming their efforts right now to help us all. So Matthew, would you like to kick things off?
Well, hello everybody. It's really good to see the folks I've known and met and worked with over the years before, and I hope to meet those who I haven't met and talk to you afterwards, because the process of the refreshing the case for culture, as I've discovered through the whole process that we've been working on, is one which is constant and ever changing. I don't know if anyone has watched The Simpsons, that great cultural reference for us all. There's a show in that called The Itchy and Scratchy Show, which features hapless characters who every moment are getting bashed over the head by things along the way that have come on. And when you think what we've been through as a sector, if you think through the impact of COVID and think you're getting that, and then you look at what's happened with climate change, and then you look at what's happened with the cost of living, and then you look at what's happening up now with mayoral change, and the hallmark for the sector has been, we need to take control, we need to govern this agenda, because otherwise there are so many things that will be bashing us and pulling us off course that we'll never get to where we need to be. So I just want to say a few words first of all about the Case for Culture and where we are. Over 500 people have been involved in the process, and organisations. And it has been a process which we came together in July. I mean, people blinking as they stepped into the light and in front of other human beings and realising that they were real and not just an avatar. And that was a great opportunity to hone this further. So the key findings that we found is that the original Case for Culture, if you're aware of it, the documentation's available, hold good. But there are a number of things that had happened over the intervening years since the launch of the Case for Culture that meant that it would be helpful to look at those. In terms of the areas that we found, I'd just say on equity, equality and audiences, I think the feedback from people is very much, we've just got to stop talking about it. Really got to stop talking about this, and we really have to do it. And whether we've got money or not, we have to commit resources. So very practical things. One person who responded to it saying, in fact, several people, one person very involved in disability, another person working in ethnicity, another person working with lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, plus communities, were saying, we're fed up of just turning up when you want to hear something. We've got expertise, we've got skills, but just treat us the way you treat any other professional. And a similar aspect as well, in looking at those practical issues, there are many that are covered in the document, but to give that example, if we want people to be involved in our organisations, what are the practices that we've got that stop them? You know, if I were working on a 0 hours contract job, not knowing from day to day when I was going to have to go to work, coming along to attend a board meeting might just not be a possibility. So part of the findings is saying, let's just really look into how we operate, what we do, and what barriers that we've got that we can change without waiting for money, without waiting for things from the outside. On the economy, the recommendation for that going forward is that we really need to harness the economic power of the sector. And we know that if the Northeast were a pinball table, there are all of these brilliant points spread around the region in terms of the heritage offer. But getting that working together and joined up in terms of travel, in terms of transport, in terms of making it a space for people to be, needs developing. So the formation of a subcommittee looking at the economy is to look at both those macro level things, but also how we equip people to participate. And that's picked up in the cultural workforce and skills. The idea of a cultural skills academy, if you look to what's happening in film and television now, millions of pounds of investment coming into the region. And at the heart of that is saying we also need to develop the skills to make sure this is not just the money comes in, evaporates and is gone. And the notion of if you think a cultural skills partnership, or indeed a heritage skills partnership. And some of the challenges there have been, how do we allow people who have got great things to contribute to the heritage story and bring great authenticity in their voices, in their locations, in their families, in their backgrounds, how do we ensure that they've got as much chance to be involved in the curation and the leadership of organisations if they haven't come through a conventional route? And that might be saying about, have we got hidden barriers in there? Do we really need a degree for this? Do we really need an advanced degree? And again, these are things which can be looked at and need to be if the sector is going to maximise all of the potential that's there. Because the greatest advocate might be somebody who's turned up in your organisation, been there for 3 years, and you've only seen them serving you a cup of tea. So that aspect of looking at the cultural workforce is going to be a key thread through to 2030. Climate emergency. And here there's a range of areas, and particularly relevant to the heritage sector. One of the issues, I think anyone who is responsible for a building will know, the impacts that we're now seeing, whether it is excessive dryness, whether it's the loss of reservoirs, the impact of that on foundations, excessive rainfall, and managing with that mean that there's just real challenges to having a building. And not least of all, those issues which relate to the cost and keeping stable environments. Now, at that level, the notion behind this is looking at a green fund. And I'll talk about the changes that are coming up, which might be able to afford support for this. But this is to enable the sector to really meet these challenges, because there's no point telling a story about all the wonderful things that can be done if people are actually investing most of their time trying to keep the very buildings that they have and resources they have working. There's also the fact that one of the strengths of the sector is being able to tell stories of how people have lived differently and how they've responded to different environments. I love the image that before the end of the land bridge, people coming over from what would have been Scandinavia and then setting up camp around near Craster and coming on hunting trips and movements. That world doesn't exist anymore, but we know what that world was like. And that the sector has a way of telling stories to people about change, about impact, about how people have lived their lives, when we, I'm going to say as a society, are very much locked into a sense that this is the only way that we can live. This is the only world there will ever be. And the challenge from a scientific perspective is that the case for the issues about what now called the climate emergency are very, very clear. And the frustration that I've met, I worked on producing a film score for a film about the environment that was just premiered at the Science Festival in Edinburgh a couple of weeks ago. But the reason why the universities got behind that is that they said, how are we going to connect with people? We can see this terrible train coming down the road to us, but somehow we aren't getting our story across as scientists. And so there's that potential as partnership with the sector to use the skills that within the sector to tell that story and help people understand that work. There's also an issue, though, about practice. Anyone who's a glassmaker will know that, I depend on fossil fuels at the moment. How's that going to work? So we also think there's a need to support people to look at practice across the board and how they can experiment and find new ways of working. And again, international links. It's still important, and I know parts of the sector have fabulous links, are working internationally, but there's always a dimension. So there are great connections with China, the moment, connections with Russia, maybe not so good, and culture. But it is also really to make that case again, but it's at a small level of individuals, the kids who used to get on that ferry, that ferry, and go over and play a series of gigs in a clapped out van and then come home again. Those sorts of things are virtually impossible now, just because of our position. Okay, so what's the big change? I think the biggest change, well, not just me, actually my colleagues as well, is the advent of the North East Mayoral Combined Authority. And just a reminder, I'm sure everyone knows these powers, don't you? I know, you probably chant them before you go to bed. The functional power of competence. God, I wish I had that. But these are the areas, and I think that the answer to a lot of those questions that have been thrown up through the exercise, and do pick up your copy of this if you've got it, it does set out in a far more cogent sense than me standing here in front of you, the issues that we've been working through collectively. But you start looking at this and to realise this is where the power to answer some of those things will lie. So if we look at that issue, responsibility for education skills and training for the new mayor's authority, that's a budget controlled within this region. And if the sector is able to make its case, the money is there to do that. This thing of being mediated and having to look at this working through Westminster or working through a government department is coming home. The issue about housing and regeneration, and we know about the success stories that have been worked through already in parts of the region, the power of culture to transform and address those issues about failing town centres and about making sure that there is animated life in rural centres. That power is there. And even some of them, when we start looking at housing and planning, I think some of the challenges and issues, particularly in terms of heritage buildings, there may need to be a discussion about fitness for purpose. And if this is going to be the nature of the weather that we have and the challenges we're facing, is there scope for a discussion about resources? Just a tiny anecdote. I was involved in restoring a Category A listed building in Scotland. Beautiful, beautiful Category A listed building called Blackburn House. Huge amounts of money spent on ensuring that the valley guttering was exactly as it was found. Problem is, the volumes of water coming through meant that it exceeded the height of the valley guttering. Net result of that, massive ingress of water. And some of those challenges, maybe there should have been a scope for a discussion to say, can we look at other ways of doing this? You may have to record it differently or to work with it. So the opportunity when you start looking at those things about planning, it can be both defensive. You may actually find the scope for people to really harden the case beyond what has been expected before. But in others, it means there's an arena to discuss those things. And of course, the finance, some of these issues for investment, if we make the case for a green investment fund and the new mayoral authority can actually raise funds, can look at a levy on that and respond to those answers, then that is something where, again, it's not waiting at the end list. And I should say, we've had a really tough time bidding for funds. In the North East, if you look to the figures, the North East has not done well in the competitive funding rounds that we've had since. Slight change recently, but on the whole, levelling up has not been that great. And also the powers in terms of transport. Well, that whole point, if you're sitting here thinking, wait a minute, Bamborough, 500,000 visitors a year, majority arrive by internal combustion engined cars, private cars and vehicles. Let's just roll back that and look at what the infrastructure is for venues to service that. Anyone here who came here, I noticed a couple of complete electric vehicles and the 3-hour parking spot for charging. Now let's just roll that through to what may be almost 200,000 individual visits currently delivered by cars rather than public transport. So that discussion about shaping the agenda for public transport and the role for the sector is one that's going to be vital. Otherwise, with all the best will in the world, if people can't get there, if people can't afford to get there, if people can't afford to come to you to work, then the impact will be very damaging. So good, you've saved, I've run through that, giving you the example of the details that would cover. So, what does devolution offer? Well, it's offering a new focus for the North East Culture Partnership. With the south of the region now going, we wish Teesside very well, and they will be pursuing their own work, but I'm sure there will be much in common as these themes emerge. I don't think the environment is literally going to stop at the border. But that does mean now that there are no longer 12 local authorities, but 7. But they recognise the value of the NECP, and through that, all of the effort that people have made in supporting the work that they've done. So there's a net funding increase. So the great thing is, okay, what has to be done? Well, there is money that's now come into the sector to help implement these and take it forward. And that gives us a chance, really, to embed the priorities of the sector in the new mayoral authority. So life is long, art is eternal, but really the focus now is going to be to the mayoral authority, because that's the one chance to really make the case locally and to take control of it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Matthew. And for any of you who've got some further questions regarding what he shared today, there will be questions following this session as well as afterward. Before I introduce the next speaker, I also wanted to share that Ashleen Paris of the Heritage Alliance, are you in the room, Ashleen? Yes, waving her hand. The Heritage Alliance has won one of the Innovation Fund grants from the National Lottery Heritage Fund. And Ashleen is here to explore how the heritage sector accesses supportive information, meaning the type of resources that can support workforce and operational resilience, but which might not always be available for everyone in-house. For example, guidance on business planning, governance, HR, marketing, case studies, best practice, staff training materials, etc. And we'll be looking at the barriers that organizations face when searching for information and testing possible solutions for the future. Ashleen is doing some research to find out what sector colleagues in the Northeast think about these questions, and she will be out in the gallery space during the 2 breaks next to a big whiteboard and wants to collect all of your thoughts on these questions. So it would be very useful if at some point during the day you can find your way over and help her with her research, especially since the funder's in the room. And with that, I would like to introduce Jodi Larder. Thank you.
Hi everyone, can you hear me? Yeah, good. Little button. I'm really glad I wasn't the first speaker, but going after Matthew wasn't necessarily my preference either. Okay, so I am a Senior Engagement Manager for the Heritage Fund, and my remit is across the north of England. Obviously, the Northeast is my favourite, and that's why I'm here today, but don't tell the others. So we have a pilot scheme, the Innovation Fund, that we have our first cohort going through. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. The first thing I kind of wanted to touch on, the Heritage Fund, I can't say National Lottery Heritage Fund because my teeth are too big, so I'm just going to say Heritage Fund. Heritage Fund is the largest funder of UK heritage, and we kind of bandy around a lot of stats all the time, and a lot of the money kind of goes through our open programs. What I wanted to highlight here was the stats that are looking towards business enterprise and development programs and digital skills, and we're starting to see some different kind of things kind of come through our funding and that we're giving money to. So it's just to flag that. The Innovation Fund is one of these strategies, I suppose. Please don't be distracted by the pictures. I put them in because I was kind of on the topic of challenge. So I've used some pictures where there's been challenges that the heritage sector has overcome. The Innovation Fund itself, what we were expecting, what the Heritage Fund were expecting out of this was that we would be looking at a workforce challenge specifically. So we would be listening to what workforce challenges were out there. We wanted to see organisational commitment. That was really vital to it, that the organisation itself was signing up to cohort learning, to leadership skills, and to kind of be thinking differently. So we offered grants of £25,000 for 6-month kind of explore phase. It was this is what's undergoing at the moment. And we were expecting kind of costs for staff, for research budgets, maybe a little bit of materials and things like that, professional support. And we also wanted to understand if the workforce challenge was useful to the wider sector. And I think probably that helped within decision making. So for the fund, for the first time, this was really different for us. We're always a project-based funder. We expect a beginning, a middle, and an end. This isn't. It's an explore phase. So we don't actually know whether any of these things are going to work. So that's quite good in itself. That kind of hopefully a little bit of fresh thinking. We're working in partnership as well. So the Young Foundation are leading the cohort and we are supporting them. With having a partner, there's a little level of independence as well. So the cohort can be honest whether things are working or not. So we'll see how that goes. And we trialled a different assessment process as well. Strangely, because I was involved in it, and that's not my job, I'm not supposed to assess, but that wasn't the weirdest thing. So we actually included conversations and interviews within the assessment process to kind of challenge our assumptions as well of what we were reading. So that was really useful as well. So there's kind of, this is the fund's expectations. We had, I'm trying to remember, I think it was 71 applications that came in under the Innovation Fund. We did the usual trick of giving people a very short amount of time to be able to respond to the pilot. So to get 71 responses was quite good. 35 awards were made across the UK and 35 members of the cohort. So that seems quite large if I was a facilitator, but I think manageable in the way that it's been put together. 3 projects were funded in the North East. I'm really glad. So there's Heritage Alliance here. Please talk to them. Dig Ventures here today. So please talk to them about their project. So Dig Ventures was largely about data and the historic environment record and what we can do there. Again, Heritage Alliance was also about data. What do we have as a sector? There's lots that's out there. There's lots to do with good practice. There's lots to do with training. So it's about capturing that. And the third that was based in the North East is the North Eastern Yorkshire Film Archive. So they were very much looking at born digital media and the skills and kind of staff resources and things to be able to manage that. Over the whole cohort of 35, there were some strong themes emerging. And I suppose I should say that it's a mix of heritage sectors as well. So there's the environment in there, there's industrial maritime, there's buildings, museums, archaeologists, there's even the Antarctica Trust. So it's kind of really is a breadth. And the remit of the other organisations will impact the North East. It will infiltrate because the wildlife trusts are in there, the wetland centre, so there'll be conservation things, historic houses association, kind of film archives and things like that. So there will be hopefully learning to come out of this that can help the North East. But the themes broadly, looking at the very top layer of what people were wanting to do, were around inclusion challenges that people have. So one kind of small group in the cohort, I suppose, are really looking at representing the communities that they're there for, like actually being truly representative. So that was a challenge. Other inclusion challenges were more largely around traditional access or career pathways as well. Recruitment. This is a really interesting one. Lots of people were coming at the recruitment challenge, and some were going at it from the point of view that the systems are wrong. They're looking at systems and processes. Others were looking at recruitment with the sense of how to get young people in and through the journey and keep recruiting the best people with the skills through that kind of work lifespan. Voluntary recruitment was in there as well as part of our kind of staffing ecology, I suppose, within the heritage sector. Data. 2 examples in the room, so I'm not going to go through that one again. Climate and energy. So there was a few that were looking at this, and especially in light of the kind of cost of living crisis, huge energy rates, the climate crisis. It's kind of, what do we do? And there was a couple within the Innovation Fund that are looking at that. So energy within museums and buildings was coming up. And a lot of the nature sector ones were just largely about environmental practice and stemming climate change and what they can do. And skills came up probably in nearly all of them in some way, shape or form. So it was very much, there's skill shortages, and horticulture was mentioned, industrial, maritime and heritage were mentioned, and it's how to change that, how to embed that. So it's interesting to see some of the resonance between the things that Matthew was saying here. The UK wide is saying these sorts of things, and this isn't even taking into account the people who unfortunately didn't get the funds. They were still looking at these themes. I just wanted to reflect on the Innovation Fund process. So the cohort has started. They are 3 months through the 6 months. So in terms of what I can report back, there's not a lot out there just yet. I've been looking at some of the session plans and the evaluation coming out of it, and it maybe it's as you would expect. So that just explore, has anyone ever just said you could sit down for a few hours in your working day and just think on what that problem is? No, not really, because you kind of get interrupted and all of this. So that just kind of freeness, that ticket to explore, kind of off you go. So that's working. Cohort, the kind of cohort process and working with peers across the sector seems to be very well valued. They are looking at innovation practice and theory through the Young Foundation, leadership skills and things like that. So there's that theory there. There's the kind of strong underbed of what needs to happen. The gift of time, that's quite obvious. The gifts of problem shared, you would imagine that, because there's nothing more relieving than to go, they have that problem too. We're kind of like, brilliant. So in that space, and there's no reason why that kind of space couldn't be created through partnerships kind of like this as well. And as I said before, the organisational commitment, that was key, that organisational commitment, just to say, I'd like that person to look at this challenge, consider how they can lead in this field. So that's the Innovation Fund. Where that leaves us now, the Heritage Fund now, is that pilot is going. So we hope that there will be test phases and grow phases to that explore phase. But we don't know yet because they're only halfway through. What we do know is that we launched a new strategy in March, and we have these 4 investment principles that we'll be moving towards. There was a significant amount of consultation. Apparently the kind of biggest response that we've ever had in the UK to a consultation to come up with these 4 themes. So saving heritage, protecting the environment, organisational sustainability and inclusion. They're all topics that we'll be talking about today. So they do seem to be relevant and resonant. We intend, so far we've said that we will intend to do that through our opener programmes, through strategic initiatives, so such as the Heritage Innovation Fund, the Business and Enterprise Development, and also partnership working. We're starting to think genuinely how we can work differently with partners and in the sector. And I just wanted to say, this is I'll give the slide for the Heritage Alliance, just the amount of resources available that we have as one funder. The website is an absolute wormhole. So get a cup of tea or a gin and tonic. You can find out about the strategic interventions. There's loads of good practice stuff on there. Data and insight research that I didn't even know existed. I've been flicking through it and there's new ones on there that they've not said about. Blogs and thought leadership. You can see kind of what people are saying. We do also have funding for this sort of thing. It's the first time that I've really spoken without having to massively plug the funding bit. And people, that picture's there because it's the people in this room. For the North East, this is a hugely valuable, knowledgeable resource and bank of people that are in this room. And thanks. And I'm really looking forward to speaking to people today and listening to all of the kind of challenges and things that are going on. Thank you. Am I in time?
Thanks so much, Jodi. That's really fascinating. So now we've got plenty of time for questions. So who's first? We got some roving mics actually coming up. So whilst we're waiting for hands to go up, I think one of my first questions or thoughts in response is it sounds like the HLF itself or the Heritage Fund itself has been already affected by an innovation process. So you're changing the way you're working in response to what you're experiencing through the innovation cohort.
Hopefully, yeah. I would say that we are, and it's a kind of coming from central as well as local teams at the moment. So that's really nice to kind of see. Be interesting to see what the business plan comes out like in the summer and how that actually works on paper. But yeah, at the minute it seems quite open and nice.
And I was lucky enough to have a look at Matthew's results as well as some of the stuff from the Heritage Fund before we came here today. And I was very struck by how much overlap there is. Matthew, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, well, I think it's because people in the sector as a whole recognise that these things are important.
Mike, there we go.
Here we go, yeah. I think it's because people in the sector realise these things are important. So I'd be really worried if everyone was pointing in different directions. And I think I also say that the point about why we aren't doing as well in the Northeast, there's quite a lot of detailed assessment when it comes to looking at this in the longer report, which is going to be released later, is the capacity in successful bid writing and successful bid winning. And I'm sure you won't tell anybody. But when you look at the results of the recent national portfolio funding bids, the Northeast did very badly. And part of that, comparatively, was down to the way that there weren't stories being articulated that really grappled with the priorities of those funders. So it's not enough to be able to say, we'll do this with access, we'll work with these communities. There weren't exciting ideas coming forward that were beating people elsewhere. And similarly on some of the levelling up funds, recently, if you've gone through a round of levelling up funding and the Northeast is below the south of England, the southeast of England, in success of winning funds. So that issue, which you mentioned earlier, building capacity, and one of the priorities through for NECP is looking at how you build that capacity to tell the stories, to develop really strong cases, because all the time we're in a competitive environment, we have to win. And what's happened so far, we haven't to the same degree. Congratulations to those that have, but it's not as strong as it should be.
Well, there's a challenge. Are there any other, any questions from the audience on, yes, excellent, from the top. I think bid writing is one of those areas, isn't it, where it takes a very particular approach. Yeah.
Hi, I was interested to hear what Matthew said about, adult education was mentioned in Matthew's slides in terms of priorities. And I'm just wondering what lobbying is being done to try and pull back on this increasing theoretically skills for work focus without actually accepting that heritage is a workforce as well.
One of the strands of work for NECP in the period going forward is to engage both with existing providers, but crucially, as I think, it's one of the skill areas that's being devolved to the combined mayoral authority. So there will be somebody who has that as part of their core work. In order to shape it, though, we need to build that relationship. And that's why I'm saying the next year is about helping to lay that groundwork so that when people come out and put themselves forward for election, they're actually coming from a base where they've had that informed by the views of the sector. The challenges, though, of saying the Cultural Skills Development Fund, Cultural Skills Development, and the same thing in terms of heritage, is that there's really granular work that has to be done and shared within the region about the skills that are needed and the levels that they need. And it seems to be across the board, both at the strategic level and at that operational level, about looking at the skills required. One of the skills, just looking back to COVID, I know we don't want to look back at COVID, but just looking back to COVID, one of the correctives, I think, in the sector was realizing that actually some of the most important people in an organization were those who were generating ancillary income. And that's in terms of catering staff. And when you then look to how people have left the sector and how they've gone to other places, and it took something like that to make us realize actually these people might be more valuable. So as I mentioned earlier, yes, there is a relationship with funders, but I think also looking internally and looking at the response we've had so far and saying, what could we do in terms of enhancing the skill base that we actually possess and take that further in discussion with people who are working with you?
As somebody who's working on a fairly major heritage project which spans the border between County Durham and the Tees Valley Combined Authority, are there opportunities or dangers in the fact that the two areas are now divorced in terms of having a strategy for culture and heritage? That's the first one. Bank that one. The other one is a statistical one. In terms of valuing heritage, clearly it's fairly easy to say how many people visit a museum, an art centre, and put a number of people employed. All these things can be given figures very easily. How do we get across to politicians in particular that if you conserve a landscape, a historic landscape, it's an industrial landscape, that costs a lot of money and it doesn't have an admission fee afterwards. But without doing that, you don't then get the tourists, the people who run bike hire businesses, do guided tours and things, actually creating the economic impact. How do you get across to them the value of that, what appears to be a deficit in terms of investing in heritage, but it's incredibly valuable?
Well, to take the first one, I would say from my experience, at an officer level and as individual people involved in the sector, I see there being no problems or barriers. But we are in a situation where people are establishing their profile, whether they wish to get re-elected or to take forward their case in their party. And I think there will be the potential for things moving apart. And I think that's why it's very important for the sector to ensure that people are informed. So of whatever political party, the underlying principles and the facts that we have. And I think Jodi talked about the wealth of information. Maybe the challenge is synthesizing that into a way which will work. So that's a potential risk. And I think if we see the elections go forward, there will be all sorts of things going on, particularly if we're then going to be going on into a national election. I'd like to use the example of Gabon for your second question. Most people haven't heard of Gabon. It's a small central West African country, but mainly because it doesn't have wars and doesn't have all those things which tend to hog our news. But they have found a way of articulating internationally the value of their nature reserves, of the rainforests, and of the environment. And if you think about the resource base we're coming from, that argument has been made by teasing out all of those longer term values. So I think the issue about looking at the value for the environment and the landscape is to actually bring people together to look at how that's costed and articulated. And I think one of the issues are it's a conditional requirement. It may not deliver the results immediately, but you look at how that underpins the case. So how it was done in terms of Gabon would be that very well-informed people looked at it very honestly, looked at that through, built an economic case, built a model that looked at the value over and beyond finance, and that was being accepted globally. Similar discussions have gone through in terms of aspects of how we approach this within Brazil. So you've just got to think that Quilda is actually a rainforest, and look at how people have taken that information to make those cases. It doesn't mean to say that there will not be great competition. And the issue about the agricultural sector post-Brexit is that we still haven't fixed upon exactly how subsidies are going to work as planned. So it will be tough. The thing is, work with people. NECP has a core of the universities in the region, and I think that's one of the issues. It would be great to set them working on behalf of the sector to help inform that discussion.
And there is also, at the moment, the DCMS is in the process of trying to establish a value framework for cultural heritage capital in the same way that natural capital is sort of light years ahead. And those conversations are mind-bending as they try to sort of unpick everything that goes into valuing something like a landscape, which would fall under cultural heritage capital. I know that Lizzie Glitherow at Heritage Alliance is hosting a lot of those conversations. And you can reach out to them and potentially find out where things are. And also Rob Lennox from the Chartered Institute for Archaeologists is also leading on those efforts. So if you wanted to hear a little bit more about where that has gotten to and how things are initially being valued, then those are some people to check in with. Cool. Is anything else from the floor? No? Well, I was a little curious to ask Jodi, actually. You mentioned something about in the beginning of your presentation that you're starting to see different things coming through the fund from the sector. And I wondered if you could expand a little on what sort of different things you've seen.
Yeah, well, I suppose it's just that concept of where we used to, because we are a project funder, we were seeing standard, I don't say standard, there's some very good ones, but in terms of a model that it was a project start, middle and end. It was, this is the heritage, we'll look at it, this is who we're going to engage with it, these are the activities, and we've tied it up with a bow kind of at the end. And now it's, some things are coming in, and we want to pilot this, but we don't know if it's going to work, if it's going to be something, whether we can roll it out. We're starting to see things where more resilience is built in, so they're kind of looking under the bonnet of the organisation, maybe someone, and then a project might come across and things like that. So we're seeing much more of a mix in terms of what we would have ordinarily had. And at the moment, that's sitting okay under the outcomes framework that we've already had for the last long time. So it will be interesting to see under how those kinds of things sit under the 4 investment principles, especially when there's sustainability in there as a key one and resilience in there as a key one. I think it will sway the kinds of projects that will be coming in and kind of, what people want to do that's right for them, I suppose.
What I was trying, I see you, Matthew, but what I was trying to tease you into saying was, is the resilience strategic priority and the sort of nudging towards partnerships, the HLF's way of sort of saying, NPO type things are happening in the heritage sector? Because to me, when I'm reading into it, we've all been asking that question for years. Why don't you do it? Is it ever going to happen? And it seems like that's a step towards acknowledging that post-pandemic there are very different needs in the sector.
Yeah, I think we're acknowledging that there's different needs. I'm not sure whether we would go down the NPO route and pattern, but we certainly recognise that there needs to be more support, more of a support from us as a funder for the sector. So the partnerships thing and our different ways of working is thinking, so for example, regionally we could, we've done it before with the nature sector actually in Nature North, we convened a session to kind of say, well, hold on, does this sector need to be shouting on a larger platform here? Do they need to be working with, MP11 colleagues and so on to be able to get that stuff embedded? So it was a different way of convening of partnership work, and then it kind of has kind of fledged, if that makes sense. So I think there'll be, the partnerships thing is a hint towards a bit more of that, a bit more of innovation fund with some of those. One of the business support and enterprise was done with Heritage Alliance and things like that. So I think more of that will come on board as well. I think I've been reading the board papers frantically to see if I can pick up on any little secrets that are going to them before the staff, but nothing yet.
Okay, noted. Matthew.
Yeah. I think the key story to share is about, in this case, Heritage Plus. So the need to get those partners outside the heritage sector is not just offensive, it's a fabulous opportunity. So if you look within the North East and think, wait a minute, there's £25 million being invested in programme making. As you look through to North East Screen, and the stories that the sector has and can tell, if presented to those companies, could be a godsend. So getting stories out, looking at those partnerships that can generate revenue, excuse me, get your story out about, but be something where there's a great demand. Netflix's annual spend, I think, is about 1.2 billion. BBC's, I think, total across the board might be 1.5. So there are powers which are hungry for content, hungry for interesting stories. And I think one of the biggest benefactors so far, I would say Robson Green's probably done more to promote the North East beyond its area, because it's somebody who speaks an authentic voice, who knows and loves the area, but has the skills and contacts in television to tell that story. So I think that thing about developing partnerships and capacity, it's also looking at that strand of entrepreneurialism, and particularly at a time when a shop can yield in pennies and pounds, But those sorts of relationships can generate real money and take the story of the region globally. So I suppose that point is, think big, because the potential's there, the resources are coming at this time, and it's a great story to tell.
Robson might have come. We should have invited him.
Oh my gosh, that's a good point. Next time. Yeah, he's too busy having fun on Lindisfarne or something. But it struck me listening that one of the things I hear quite a lot working in heritage is that where do we go to find things? Like, where is the central point or observatory to find out what everybody is doing, or where to share these stories, or where to feed in that we've got this fantastic story to tell. So perhaps one of the outcomes we can have from this event, as your research, Matthew, moves forward, is, how are we going to create that space and be able to cohesively speak and platform what's going on in the heritage sector in the Northeast. I would really welcome that. Well, it seems like we may have answered everything for now, so we'll break a little bit early. And then if I could just ask everyone to be back in their seats for 2:50, and we'll carry on with the rest of the day. Thank you.